Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's enjoying the day. We have such a plethora of interdisciplinary papers and discussions. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Mary Lefkowitz, who I first met when I came to Wellesley College, I guess 30 years ago. And Mary is actually an institution unto herself at Wellesley College. She went to Wellesley College and then proceeded to uh, get a PhD in classical philology and at Radcliffe, and then came back to Wellesley and taught for 46 years, and began teaching at Wellesley in 1957, 2 years before I was born, which is always very humbling to think about. And I arrived at, this is important for me to tell the story. I arrived at Wellesley right at the time when, well, we think there's a culture war going on now, and there actually is a culture war going on, but there were culture wars going on 20 years ago as well, 30 years ago as well. And when I got to Wellesley, there had been a book published by a scholar named Martin Bernal called Black Athena, which essentially was a 3-volume trilogy arguing that essentially the Greeks stole their philosophy from Egyptians, and it was very thin on data. And Mary, being a consummate philologist and linguist, challenged his work and challenged the entire effort to the Afrocentric effort to critique Greek philosophy for being essentially ignoring its African origins. But it's a long story, and she wrote a very important book called Not Out of Africa, How Afrocentrism Became an Excuse to Teach Myth as History. And what struck me at the time, being a new professor, just 30 years old, was that how Mary Lefkowitz insisted on facts, insisted on making, as a historian and a philologist and a linguist, insisted on making sure that assertions about the ancient world were backed up by facts, and proceeded to undo this work, and sometime at great cost to herself, in fighting that culture war, because the Afrocentric movement was very popular then, and to go against it was to challenge certain political norms and certain political correctness norms at the time. Anyway, it's been my pleasure to know her, and I think she's professor emerita now. But I also wanted to mention that Mary, it wasn't in the biography, but I wanted to stress this, that Mary was a recipient in 2006 of the National Humanities Medal, which is one of the greatest honors that any humanist can achieve, it seems to me. And I just wanted to, remind people of that. And her biography on the NEH website shows that her work has been deeply involved in bringing to the fore the role of women. She's written 3 books at least on the role of women in Greek society. And I just wanted to give a couple quotes from the NEH website, not to go on too long. "I wouldn't have liked living in ancient times. I couldn't have done the things I have done," says classic scholar Mary Lefkowitz. Quote, "But I think ancient women did more things than we imagined they did. They were appreciated when they did things well." Lefkowitz has written 3 books on the role of women in ancient societies: Heroines and Hysterics, Women in Greek Myth, and Women's Life in Greece and Rome. I could go on by reading the biography, but one of the things that's so wonderful about Mary is that in her emerita stage, it's been publishing regularly. Her last book was on Euripides and was nominated for an award. And I'm really grateful that she came from Wellesley to Wake Forest to talk about Eudaimonia, as she told me that was the proper pronunciation. And I'd like to invite her now to the stage and welcome my colleague, Mary Lefkowitz from Wellesley. And thank you for coming.
Well, thanks everybody. This is the Somebody had to do it. Somebody had to be the spoiler at the conference, and I think this is going to be me, probably in a number of ways. Anyway, Eudaimonia before Aristotle, as I told Tom when he invited me to come, I said, well, you know, what do I know about Aristotle? But let's begin with, can I hit that? No, do I have to click this? Tell me, somebody, what to do. Okay, good. Let's see what happens. Eudaimonia. It's Aristotle's word, and this is what the translation says. This is a standard translation: well-being, happiness, or flourishing. But that isn't what it means. It's an English approximation. And for the most part, every translation we read of ancient Greek is an approximation. It's particularly true in philosophy and Greek drama. Homer may be a little bit better, but it's really tough to get an English word that represents it. It's an ancient language. That's one of the problems. And behind this word, as you can see, eu, you know, it's good, but daimon, it's the word in Aristotle's time and before meant a divinity. It could refer to a god. It could refer to another kind of sort of less divine figure. And it comes from the root dai, Indo-European root dai, which means to distribute. And remember, those who've read the Apology, Socrates had this, he spoke of this daimonion, this divine something that told him what was right and what was wrong. And this was one reason it was crazy to condemn him to death for impiety. So his impiety, but people were worried about his questioning of the gods. He says that Apollo was always right and so forth. But nonetheless, daimon doesn't have a negative meaning in the 5th century or the 4th century and before. That meaning gets picked up more in later times when other religions were competing with ancient Greek religion, and Christianity comes in and doesn't accept these gods. So the original meaning, as it says up there, is favored by divinity, the eu part, having good fortune, having a good allotment from the gods. Wow. So it refers to religion to a great degree. Let's take it back then to before Aristotle. So example one of this, was eudaimonia possible before? Did anybody think it was possible? And the answer is probably not. Not for mortals. For most, death without promise of a happy afterlife. There's nothing you can say, well, we suffer now to get rewards later. But it was just going to a rather dismal place and living with your family. That might have been good or bad. It depends on your family. Suppose it was Oedipus's family, for example. That might have been not an ideal situation. Think of it. Think of the things they would have had to discuss in the lower world. Maybe not even possible for gods, because those who've read the Iliad remember that Hera and Zeus are always arguing. And there are other arguments going on. The gods take two sides about the Trojan Wars, and they're competing with each other. Though it's never tragic because nobody dies because they are immortal, right? So let's talk about this as an example of it. And that's why I put the jar. As you'll see, that's an illustration from a much later Greek phase. This one is red figured, so it's 5th century. In the last book of the Iliad, Priam comes to visit Achilles. Now, Priam's king of Troy, and Troy is not doing very well at this point because Hector, their principal fighter, the son of Priam, the king, has been killed by Achilles because Achilles was out to get him because he'd killed his close friend Patroclus. So Achilles is so upset that Patroclus is dead that he is in his hut, and Priam comes to ransom Hector's body, which Achilles has been abusing, has been dragging around Patroclus's tomb in a chariot. And this is such a desecration of a corpse that even the gods get angry and ask him to stop. So Priam comes to ransom the body from Hector, and you can see up on the screen that Priam is over on the left-hand side, imploring Achilles, who's lying on this couch with his armor over on the right-hand side, and the corpse of Patroclus is lying there. This isn't very realistic in a hot climate of anything to do, but this is how it's portrayed in a vase painting. Go on. So Achilles on human life. He's talking to Priam, and he says that mortals have had they have very difficult lives, and it's such a sad scene because poor Priam has to come and kiss the hand of the man who has killed his son, and Achilles is mourning Patroclus, and so they're both very, very sad. So Achilles says, the gods have decreed that mortals live in sorrow, and there are two possibilities, and that's because there are two jars. Now why is that up there? I don't know. That's the next slide. Let me just say there are two possibilities. It's a mixture of good and evil you can have in your life. Sometimes one, sometimes the other, but never all good. But there's total misery, which you can get. A man can get an allotment of all bad, and that man goes dishonored by gods and by mortals. He just has a totally bad time. It's Eudaimonia, as was explained earlier. And Achilles' father, Peleus, and Priam himself, Priam, the king of Troy, had mixed lots in life. Priam was king of Troy. He was infinitely wealthy, had a lot of concubines. He had many children, very good ones and bad ones too, like Paris by his wife. But both had sons, excellent sons, who died in battle. Priam had Hector, and Peleus, Achilles' father, is going to know that Achilles died in battle because Achilles knows that he will. His mother, who's a goddess, Thetis, told him that if he goes back into the battle, which he'd been avoiding from the beginning of the Iliad, he would die young. He would die in battle. And Paris, indeed, shoots him. So what he says is, there are two jars on the threshold of Zeus's house. And that's why I put that picture of that great big burial pithos up there. Because these huge jars, if you've ever been to Greece, to a museum, you've seen some of these, where they would store things, everything from grain to honey, and they could be used for burials as well. But one is full of good, there are two of them sitting there, and one is full of evil. And a man can have all bad, or he can have good mixed with bad, but for mortals, there's no possibility of all goods. As I said, that's reserved for the gods. And when I was teaching this passage in various classes, and I'd go over it with the students, and I'd say, so, okay, there are two jars in front of Zeus's house. Now, what are the possibilities a mortal can have in life? And they say, well, all good and a mixture. Because they could not accept this very negative view. I'm not making this up. So, but that's a general standard view of life in ancient Greece up to the time of Aristotle. Now, Aristotle, I would see from a different point of view from everybody else probably in this room, as a revolutionary, as somebody who was making a real change in the way people approached thinking about Eudaimonia. So Sophocles, those are the dates of Sophocles, sort of, we think. Well, you remember the Antigone, this most popular play, for political, after times of political oppression, people come up with this as a drama to put on in Europe and in the United States. Antigone was the daughter of Oedipus. And remember, Oedipus was fated to kill his father and marry his mother. And he has 4 children who are his half-siblings, which is a confusing family situation. And in the play Antigone, it's after Oedipus's two sons, who've been cursed by Oedipus because they didn't treat him properly, they have killed each other in battle. And so Creon's uncle, Creon, takes over the kingship and says Polynices, who attacked his own country and his own brothers, should not be buried, which is really not something you should do. All bodies deserve a proper burial. But he is so angry that he doesn't want this to happen. But Antigone, who is trying to be pious, buries her brother anyway. And so Creon sentences Antigone to death. And that is his own niece, his mother is Jocasta, and Creon is Jocasta's brother. So Greek families, like all families, pretty complicated. So here's Sophocles on Eudaimonia. And this is a choral song that comes right after Antigone is sentenced to death. And the chorus, there's a bunch of old men, say, happy, fortunate, whatever Eudaimonis can mean in English. There's no good translation of it, as I said. The ones who have good daimon, the gods are good to, presumably, are they whose lifetime never tastes of evil. For those whose house is shaken by the gods, no part of ruin, ata, very strange word, meaning delusion primarily, is wanting, as it marches against the whole of the family, like the swell of the deep sea, when darkness runs beneath the water, brought by the dire blast of winds from Thrace, it rolls up from the bottom the black sand, and the wind-vexed shore resound before its impact. So ruin hits you like the sea, and it's inexorable, and it can't be stopped. And this is a person who somehow escapes this in their lifetime is Eudaimon, nobody else. So that's the tragic vision, I think, if you really had to say what tragedy was about. And I don't think Aristotle is the best guide, because Aristotle is a revolutionary, and he didn't believe in the Greek gods in the way everyone before him had believed in, say, in the 5th century and earlier. And here's again, this is this passage later in the same choral song. For widely wandering hope brings profit to many men, but to many the deceptions, which is apatate, ate, sort of super aware, ate, of thoughtless longing, erotes, that's eros, passion. And a man knows nothing when it comes upon him until he scalds his foot in the blazing fire. For in wisdom someone has revealed the famous saying that evil seems good to him whose mind the god is leading towards disaster. So you're deluded. Someone saw that. Evil seems good to you. And so the gods are leading you to mistake good for evil or evil for good, and you get everything wrong, and that leads you towards disaster. And this is human error, and this is what humans are all bound to because of our insufficient knowledge of anything. So that's Sophocles on that. Now, what's revolutionary too about Sophocles is he's saying, fortunate are they. It's a deliberate switch from the usual saying. This is an interesting word, Macarius. You remember Archbishop Macarius of Cyprus? It's a Greek, modern Greek name. Say it went right into Christianity. It's right in the New Testament, in the Sermon on the Mount, and saying, blessed are they who are poor in spirit. That's the same word. Blessed are they, or happy are they. And Sophocles says that for mortals, eudaimonia requires the action of daimones, the gods. Normally, in Homer, would say somebody's very blessed who has a good life. But Sophocles specifies it, that it requires the actions of gods. And therefore, it can't be attained by mortals without divine action. Or, as we've heard, it can't be obtained at all. Even gods can't enjoy constant eudaimonia because other gods interfere with their plans. That happens in tragedy a lot. It happens in Homer. It's in a world with many deities. It's a wonderful explanation of how evil and confusion and mess comes in the world, because there's no overall arching plan that can be enforced for very long. Well, so that's how they regard eudaimonia. A little bit more about Herodotus. Herodotus is not an Athenian. He came from Asia Minor, from Halicarnassus, what is now Bodrum in Turkey. But he came to Athens because he got into trouble criticizing Persians who controlled that part of the world then. And so he's reading his histories in Athens. And in his histories of the conflicts between the Greeks and the Persians, he tells the story of the Lydian king Croesus and the wise Athenian statesman Solon, sort of 7th century statesman. Purpose of the story is to show that lasting eudaimonia isn't possible for empires or other forms of government. And I'll explain why in a minute, just to refresh your knowledge of the ancient Mediterranean. You can see where, I hope you can see where Lydia is, because that's just sort of in the middle of the coast of Turkey now. And that's where Croesus came from. And all the rest of the Mediterranean, the coastal Mediterranean, was pretty much occupied by Greeks. So here's Herodotus on the story. He's come to this king, Croesus, and Croesus is very excited. He wants to ask this wise man who, in his opinion, is the happiest, and there's the word olbos, which continues to be used by Aristotle. Happiest of men, expecting Solon to name Croesus himself. So Solon names Tellus the Athenian. Tellus the Athenian, nobody ever heard of him. Tellus had fine children, died fighting for Athens, and was given public honors after his death. That's Solon the Athenian's suggestion of the happiest man ever. So Croesus is not pleased. He doesn't understand that. So he says, okay, well, maybe he can be second happiest. And Solon names Cleobis and Phaeton. And these guys, when there were no oxen available, there's a typo there. They pulled their mother a long distance to the temple of Hera in Argos. Argos is it's sort of due south of Athens in the Peloponnesus. But it was quite a pull from the town of Argos up to this temple, which is uphill. I know, I've been there. And it was a big, big temple. And their mother asked the goddess then, asked Hera, to give them what was best for a mortal. And her sons lay down to sleep in the temple and never woke up. So at the moment of their greatest triumph, they died just after. And that was the best thing that could happen to a mortal, a person who was fated to die. So Croesus is really getting annoyed. He says, you're throwing out his eudaimonia into oblivion. And Solon's answer is, you're asking me about human life. But I know that the nature of divinity is envious and perplexing. This isn't God of the New Testament or the Old Testament even. You don't know what the gods are going to do. You seem to me to be very rich, he says to Croesus, and ruler of many men, but I cannot tell you what you're asking me until I learn that you've ended your life well. And he explains that wealth alone is not enough. You also need luck. 2K. So Herodotus says that in every case you have to consider how things turn out in the end. Zeus will show people a glimpse of happiness, and then he turns everything upside down, he or another god. Croesus' life becomes an example of that kind of reversal. He makes a really bad decision. He got an oracle saying, if you cross the Halys River, you will destroy a great empire. And he does, but it's his own empire and not the Persian Empire that's destroyed. He read it so that it would favor him, but it was ambiguous like all oracles. They were very smart when they gave out oracles. Well, So he's utterly defeated by Cyrus, the Persian king. He loses everything, his whole country, everything, all his wealth. So Herodotus has demonstrated to his readers that Croesus was wrong to equate being albios, being happy, with being eudaimon. What happened here? Whoop, here we go. So I just will mention that I think Herodotus may have had in the back of his mind when he was saying these things in Athens, that Athens itself was acting very, at the time, 430 BC, they were being very imperialistic themselves. This was, and even later, they got worse in the rather tyrannical way they behaved towards their subject cities and allies. They were quite a large place in the foolish decisions they made. And so that they were behaving a bit like Croesus instead of like Solon. So this is another tragic chorus. This is Euripides in the Bacchae, which is produced 405-404 BC. Eudaimon, the chorus is reflecting on what's happened. The king of Thebes, Pentheus, is about to get into real trouble. And they hate Pentheus because the chorus are believers in Dionysus and Pentheus is not. And so they are talking, in a sense, about themselves. Happy is he is always the one, which you say one in English, who escapes from the storm on the sea and reaches a harbor. Eudaimon is he who was born beyond troubles. Humans find happiness and power in different ways. Thousands of people have thousands of different expectations. Some of these end in happiness, all of us. For humankind, others vanish. That mortal who is Eudaimon today, I call him blessed, using that same word, makaridzo. So in this passage, they're defining eudaimonia in a very specific way, but they don't regard it as anything that will last tremendously long. There's a little short chorus after this, which sort of says, "Isn't it a wonderful thing to get your hand over the enemy's head? A thing of beauty is a joy forever," is how Keats translated it. It is hoti kalon, what is beautiful. Philon iae is always dear. This is not Christianity here. This is tough stuff. So now we go, I don't want to keep you forever, we'll get to Aristotle. The pre-Aristotelian definition here is that mortal who is eudaimon today, I call him blessed. It's temporary. So now, what do? How do we translate eudaimonia? How can we express in English that eudaimonia cannot be achieved without intervention or support from the gods, from the daimones? Happiness? Well, that used to be, maybe, in some very early form of English, which none of us speaks anymore. It could be defined as, this is the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, the chance or fortune that falls to a person, one's luck, lot, also an instance of that, frequently modified by good or bad, and by a possessive adjective, somebody's luck. Well, the etymology is from hap, which is good fortune or good luck in life. It's frequently modified, by good, also bad, but mishap and happenstance. Happenstance might be good, it might be bad, you might. So that's a problem. So the modern definition of happiness seems to be much more subjective. It's a state of pleasurable contentment of mind, deep pleasure or contentment with one's circumstances. This ordinary notion of happiness in English doesn't suggest any longer. There's no longer any suggestion of the possibility of divine intervention by forces beyond human control, as, for example, as in happenstance. At least there would be something uncertain about happenstance. And much less, there's no reference in this word to divine intervention. So being fortunate suggests that luck or outside intervention may be involved, but what is the noun for that? What noun do you pick? You can't pick happiness. You pick fortunateness. Fortunate has at least got some sort of chanciness involved in it, but it's not really a word, so I don't recommend it. So what's happened in the 4th century BC is that the daimon got removed from eudaimonia. Enter Plato. The ideal state envisioned by Socrates in Plato's Republic, well, even in that, even mortals could attain eudaimonia in the ideal polis, because everything would be arranged. There'd be no possibility of the kind of political mess-up that Athens had been experiencing, and the social disorder, and everyone would have his place, everyone would do his thing, and the right thing for him or her. But of course, as you know, those who've read the Republic, Plato isn't talking about eudaimonia in a real-world situation. You'd have to create an artificial state in order to have this kind of eudaimonia. So when you get later, you get to Aristotle, who studied with Plato and always acknowledged his debt to Plato. Daimonus exists. He doesn't argue about religion. On the other hand, he doesn't mention it. But he believes, I think, that these beings do not intervene in human life, and that human beings cannot communicate with them in any meaningful way. The only godlike, the theon, from theos, aspect of human life is the intellect, the nous. That's the one thing in human beings that he considers to be divine. And he completely, I think he really does reject traditional anthropomorphic theism, the kind of standard Greek religion that you see in epic and tragedy, right through from Homer, 8th century maybe, to the end of the 5th century. So Aristotle on eudaimonia, or eudaimonia without the gods, without daimones. And here's what he says, roughly translated. It appears that the eudaimon life is lived in accordance with virtue, arete. Such a life is lived with seriousness, not with fooling around or kidding around or having pleasurable parties, not by means of amusement, paideia, which means kiddie stuff, playing around. Spude, seriousness. And his view, and this is in the Nicomachean Ethics, the contemplative life, and that's tricky translation too, because theoretike, it means originally theoria meant going out and seeing something, taking a view of something. It's something that you see. It's the same word as the the part is in theater. Thea, that is it. It's confusing. Everything seems alike, but it's not. The contemplative, looking at things life, is superior to ordinary human existence, provided that it has a complete lifespan. No aspect of eudaimonia can be incomplete. Such a life would be better than what is humanly possible, for no human can live like that unless that something that is divine survives within him. So there's theoria, which you see in theatron. It's watching a show. The meaning theorize is post-Aristotelian. There is some really confusing translations of Aristotle out there, but it doesn't mean theorize in Aristotle. So for humans, he says, the life of the mind, alkata tanun bios, the life according to the mind, is the best and sweetest, since this is what a human is. This, then, is the most eudaimon existence. The man, I assume the generic man, may not include women. Probably not, since Aristotle didn't think much of women. The man who works with his mind and cultivates it and maintains it best appears to be most beloved by the gods, the theophiles, philos, as you know, friend, and tatos is superlative. If gods care about man, as is believed, he says, they will rejoice in the best part of man, which is the mind, and approve of those who honor it. So that man is theophilestotos. So, is Aristotelian eudaimonia achievable? How can we ensure that everyone will be able to live a complete lifespan devoted to intellectual activity? Well, my answer is maybe the closest is the Princeton Institute for Advanced Studies, because anybody else who's even in academia, which gives us an opportunity to have something of the contemplative life and to think about things, in America anyway, is got a lot of non-contemplative things in it, such as committee meetings, faculty meetings, meetings with students, various other distractions, political problems of every single sort, and arguments, and are we really doing any thinking? I sometimes wondered the whole time I was teaching if I ever had a thought at all. So my answer is that yes, it would be achievable only if somebody has tons of money, a lot of servants, good health. You've got a lot of ifs there, and that's not going to be possible for everybody or very many people, and mostly for most of us, our health won't hold up indefinitely, and I think many of us will not live forever. So I hate to be a spoiler, but I think eudaimonia for societies, anything in human life, is bound to be a little bit uncertain and unachievable. So that's my negative thought, to make everyone miserable at the end of a long day.